Today, we're very pleased to provide you with an update on the Beating Buruli in Victoria project and answer any questions you have. This project is a collaborative partnership between the Doherty Institute, Barwon Health, Austin Health, Agriculture Victoria, Mornington Peninsula Shire Council, Frankston City Council, Bayside City Council, and Victoria's Department of Health. The aim of this project is to better understand how Buruli ulcer is transmitted and determine effective ways to reduce and prevent infections. Now, the way this evening's meeting will work is that members of the project team, lead investigator from the Doherty Institute, Professor Tim Stinier, and research scientist from Agriculture Victoria, Dr. Peter Mee, will provide you with a very short overview of the project and details of the pilot study that's set to commence this weekend. Following this, I will then open up the meeting for questions, and we have many members from all of our partner organisations here to answer your questions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Professor Tim Stinier.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, so Tim Stinier, I'm a Professor of Microbiology at the Doherty Institute with a long-standing interest in Buruli ulcer. As Rebecca said, I have a few slides just to introduce you to the essence of what we're proposing here. But I might just quickly run around and introduce some of the key team members and give you a sense of who you'll be listening to and who's on this meeting with you tonight. So in addition to myself, we have Dr. Peter Mee from Agriculture Victoria, and he's one of the senior project leads, and we'll speak in a minute about this mosquito intervention that we're going to dig into a bit this evening. And then we have Dr. Emma Hobbs, another senior project team member, and they're both working under the supervision of Dr. Catherine Gibney, and she's the lead of this mosquito intervention. And we also have a number of representatives from the Department of Health, senior representatives from the Department of Health who have been our partners in this project from the beginning and make it all happen. Now, there's one more person I want to introduce you to, and that's Mr. Mark Upton, who's one of the senior team leaders from Environment in Health and the Mornington Peninsula Shire Council. And the Mornington Peninsula Shire Council have been key partners in this project from the beginning. Obviously, they're looking after your best interests, and we're trying to help them in those efforts. Okay, if I haven't missed anyone out from our team, I might then just move to share my screen with you. And I've just got a few simple slides that I hope will set the scene for what we're proposing to do, and perhaps before that, why we're proposing to do it. So this is the, let's just see, and I asked Rebecca for a visual check there that's projecting okay. Yep, good, thank you. So Beating Buruli in Victoria is a project that's actually been running since about 2018. And in our first iteration, we got together to try and stop the significant increase in Buruli, notably on the Bellarine and Mornington Peninsulas. And if any of you have seen the news over the last few days, you will have heard perhaps that we've gone from 20 cases in 2004 to more than 200 cases a year now since the 2015 onwards. Last year was a little bit lower, but still over 200 cases. And we're on track this year for another 200 plus cases per year. Now, we can't predict the future, but the disease is not going away in our backyard. And the imperative to do something has not diminished. So that's what our project is about. It's about trying to stop the spread of this disease in our backyard. What are we talking about? What is this infection? It's a bacterial infection of the subcutaneous tissue. That means the bacteria here, Mycobacterium ulcerans, gets under the skin and sits in the deep tissue, in the fat layer beneath the skin, and can grow slowly. Now, from the time that you get infected, and we think mosquitoes are the primary means by which people get infected, from the time that you are infected to the time you see perhaps the first signs of disease or go to your doctor, it's about four to 5 months. So it's a very long incubation period. Now, this you can see a very nasty lesion here on the right ankle of this patient. If you were to take a swab from that and look at it under a microscope, this is what the bacteria look like. Now, if you can get this disease early before it progresses to this stage when it's at its pre-ulcerative stage, perhaps when it looks like the mosquito bite that hasn't healed properly, then there are good antibiotics and the outcomes are very, very good. Now, this disease doesn't kill you. It is treatable, as I say, with good antibiotics, and we have great diagnostic tests. So early diagnosis is key. But what's better than early diagnosis is prevention. And really, that's what our project is about. For the 80 years or more that we've sort of followed this disease in Australia, we've been trying to establish how it's being spread. And in the last 20 years, we've gathered a body of evidence that's pointing us towards mosquitoes as the primary means by which this disease is spread from the environment to people. Now, I have one more slide here. If you don't like terrible ulcers, look away, but this is the progression of this ankle to a more serious state. And it's just to make the point that this is not a trivial disease. Some people say, oh, it's nothing, it's just a skin infection. For those people that get this disease and it progresses, it can be very, very troublesome and life-changing, not in a good way. All right, so I just said, why are we doing this? Well, if you look in the scientific literature on Buruli ulcer, almost every paper on that's looking at this transmission issue, how's it being spread, starts with these sorts of statements: poorly understood, transmission not known. We are addressing that gap in humanity's knowledge of this infection. Who are we? We've talked about a little bit of who we are, but we're a combination of research organisations, so University of Melbourne and AgriBio, Agriculture Victoria, based out at La Trobe University, with some partner organisations. And Rebecca mentioned those in her opening comments, and there they are written down again for you. So a combination of Victorian Government, Department of Health, major hospitals and local councils who are impacted by this disease. We receive funding from the Victorian state government through the Department of Health, but most of our support comes from the federal government through the National Health and Medical Research Council. Okay, the key players in this transmission cycle, we think, of Buruli ulcer are the Australian native possums, humans, and mosquitoes. And we can talk a bit about possums perhaps in questions later on, but the focus tonight is on how we stop the spread of the disease, and our target for controlling the disease spread is mosquitoes. So what are we proposing to do? Well, Peter's going to walk you through that in a little detail, but I'm going to give you a broad brushstroke. So what we are proposing, well, actually this is a 3-year project. But our first step, and what we'd like to explain tonight, is the pilot of our mosquito source reduction project. Now, what is mosquito source reduction? This is when we go door to door and we ask people to limit the mosquito breeding habitat that might be going on in and around their home. Now, this is a classical type of mosquito control that's done in countries where dengue is a problem. The dengue is an infection that's spread via mosquitoes. So we have some very well-established protocols that we know work for controlling other mosquito diseases that we're trying to implement here to control Buruli ulcer. Now, so this is a 3-year project. Now we're at year 1. It just started this January, so it's very early stages. But what we need to do right from the beginning is understand that this type of source reduction, which is a combination of education campaigns, the use of these little non-toxic traps that Peter will explain in a minute, called gravid traps, and then the use, if people want them, of these larvicides, little tablets that can go into your septic tank or into rainwater tank to stop mosquitoes breeding in those sites. And in our initial pilot, to show that these sort of approaches will control mosquitoes, we're aiming to recruit 500 households in the Rye, Blairgowrie, Sorrento area. And Peter will explain a little bit more about where we're active with this pilot. So the idea is stage 1 is, let's see if we can show that our mosquito control activities will reduce mosquito numbers. We're going to be measuring mosquito numbers. And then if that works, we will scale up to include more of the peninsula, other bayside areas affected by Buruli, and the Bellarine Peninsula. Now, I've spoken quickly because I don't want to do all the talking tonight, but there is more information on what we're proposing here on the Mornington Peninsula Shire's website. And if you just look up, if you do Buruli and Mornington Peninsula Shire in Google, you'll find this information. Or you can go to the Beating Buruli website hosted by Department of Health, where there is more information. And there's a very nice picture of Peter Mee there and his boss, Stacey Lynch, in fluoro. Okay, now if you want to ask us questions and you don't get a chance tonight, we have a general email line that you can write to us at, and we will respond as quickly as we can with information and support as required. Okay, that's it from me. Rebecca, I'm going to hand back to you, and I'm happy to take any questions at this point, I guess, but we're going to then pass to Peter, who will talk a little bit more about the specific traps that we're proposing in this pilot and how it'll work.
I think we might hold off on questions until Peter's spoken, and then we'll open up the floor, if that's all right. So I'll hand over to Peter.
Great. I'll just share my screen. Has that come through? Yep. Okay, yep. So as mentioned before, I'm Dr. Peter Mee from Agriculture Victoria, and I'm doing some of the insect work on this project. So as Tim was saying, we're going to use a range of different small non-toxic traps to start to measure the size of the mosquito population to start with, but then also to start removing or reducing particular mosquitoes in the area that we suspect are associated with the movement of Buruli ulcer. So there's a couple of different types that are traps that are going to be used, but the first two pictures are the most predominant ones. So we have our OV traps, which are these little traps. So it's just a black little bucket with a piece of red felt on it. And this bucket's filled with water, and inside we place a couple of hay grass pellets, so alfalfa or clover pellets. And so the idea of this trap is when you start to degrade that alfalfa pellet in the water, it actually provides a nice organic environment that mosquitoes would like to lay their eggs nearby and provide larval nutrition. So by doing this, mosquitoes will come seek out these areas, lay their eggs on these pieces of felt, and from that we can collect them, and we collect these on a weekly basis. And from that, we can actually start to determine the size of a mosquito population within an area. So using this, we have started to set these traps out around areas, our study areas of the Mornington Peninsula, and for a couple of weeks to work out how stable the mosquito population is and how large it is. So the second type of trap that we will use are our gravity traps. So gravity traps are fairly similar to OV traps, although they provide a little bit of a different purpose. So the gravity traps are also have water in them and some hay grass pellets to again provide that attractiveness for mosquitoes, and in particular the female mosquito. So when she comes along, she will try to look for a site on these ones. So this is the middle trap with the yellow little tape in it. It will try to lay some eggs again, because they usually like to lay their eggs on vertical surfaces on the sides near water. And what they do, they actually get stuck to the side, effectively removing them from the environment. So this type of trap, which is a gravity trap, has been used around the world to try to control mosquito populations, such as in Singapore. And they've shown that if you place a high density of these very basic traps around residential areas, that you can effectively reduce mosquito populations. And it's quite a nifty method, and it can be sustainably used for a long period of time to reduce these populations. So these two types of traps are a little bit different. So the OV trap with the red felt, we are actually wanting to put it on the outside or on public land, on footpaths, in bushes in there. You might start to see some of those. And that's to, as I said, monitor the mosquito population. But our other type, the gravity trap, we're asking to go inside residential yards. And the reason why this is we really want to outcompete natural breeding sites. So the mosquito species will breed in a range of different sites. So things like your bird baths or bromeliads, or if you have some other litter or fish ponds around your yard that don't have any fish in it, that's where your mosquitoes are going to breed. So we really need to get in there with our traps to try to outcompete those breeding sites. So the third trap we have is a BG trap. So this is a bit of a larger trap. And so this trap is really collecting mosquitoes that are seeking a host blood meal. And so why we're using these traps is largely because these traps have been widely used and they've been historically used in the area. And by using this same type of trap, we can start to establish some more historical data of the fluctuation in the natural mosquito population in the Mornington Peninsula, which will help us to understand the effectiveness of this pilot intervention. So this is the timeline for the intervention. So they don't actually all go out at the same time. So we actually have placed the OV traps out. So these are, as I said, to establish how large the mosquito population is. And these traps will start to come in. Actually, they'll be coming in on Friday before we start to do our gravity traps, which are in people's properties. So this coming Saturday, we're going to start going around door knocking to some certain areas to see if residents will help us out in the study and agree to host these gravity traps for a period of 4 weeks to knock down that mosquito population. Finally, after those 4 weeks, we're going to put our little OV traps out again, assess the size of the mosquito population, and by performing a comparison between our before and after numbers, we'll be able to determine the effectiveness of this control option. So this is the Mornington Peninsula, and the areas in red are the areas that we are looking at to do this study in. And we'll be putting a range of our OV traps, gravity traps, and also those BG traps in these areas to look at the populations. And finally, I guess the next question, or something that we'd really love help out with, is how to get the community involved. So as Tim mentioned before, and as I was just mentioning, one of the biggest challenges with this type of intervention is outcompeting those natural breeding habitats. So by having sources of water, standing water in your property that aren't maintained, or if you don't flush them out at least once a week, these can really turn into big hotspots and breeding sites and produce a lot of mosquitoes that can potentially move around, bite you, and transmit facilitate the movement of maybe Buruli ulcer. So by trying to reduce these sites, we can actually more effectively try to do our intervention. So yes, I guess that's one thing we really want the community to do, to start removing some of these sites, and also agree to host our gravity traps within their yards. So they're my couple of little slides.
Thank you so much to Professor Tim Stenier and Dr. Peter Mee. Now we will be opening the floor for questions. So if you do have a question, you can either raise your virtual hand or your physical hand if you do have your screen on, which I do, and I can see we already have a question from Damien. Damien, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks, Peter and Tim. Just in relation to the target group, I know you showed that map, Peter, with the streets. I'm just trying to work out exactly where those streets are located. Do you have a list of those streets that you can actually list for us, just to determine whether we're in that group?
I can, notify of the areas that those studies are in, but probably not, I guess, descripting the particular streets in fact.
I just wanted to know whether any of us on the call knew that was within our properties, and so if so, we could actually help being actively involved in that process.
So if all those areas have actually been letter dropped, so you would have had a leaflet in your letterbox that had a contact email address as well as a sign up sheet for participants. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much, Peter. We just currently don't have a letterbox at the moment. So
right.
Can I suggest, Damien, that if you wanted to copy down that email address,
I've done that. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Send us an email and we'll be able to get back to you tomorrow.
Great, thanks.
Do we have any more questions? Bev, I'll just unmute you, Bev McClure. If you can unmute your button, there's a button on your screen. I'm just seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you are. Yes, go ahead with your question.
My question was similar to Damien's because, you know, I actually have emailed Tim a couple of years ago because two of our family members have contracted a Buruli ulcer with a 2-year gap. And we're not local residents. We've just got a beach house down at Rye, and you know, I've been keen to help. So not knowing that those streets were actually set already, you know, the plots had already been set, you know, it just makes it more difficult actually to, you know, encourage others in the community to gain support, you know, and you know, that's just there. I've volunteered, but not knowing now it's probably, you know, I haven't been down for the last week or so, but haven't got a letter drop. But I'm happy to help in any other way. But if you know, if we're not there, I suppose, you know, if there are any means of encouraging people, I'd like to know and help. But if I'm not directly involved in it, that's all.
Yeah, it's tricky. In the pilot, we you know, have only focused on certain areas because it's a pilot and we just don't have we can't put all our resources into a larger scale at this stage. But the plan for years 2 and 3 over the summer periods of next year and the year after is to expand it, where we would be calling on people's goodwill again in a larger area. And so that's where I think we would, you know, potentially be calling on you and other residents beyond that the zone we've marked out at the moment. So what Peter described is really only for the next 2 months. I guess we'll be active in those areas. Then we analyze the data. You know, we look at the impact, how we reduce mosquito numbers using this approach. And then we come back next summer with a much, hopefully, you know, if everything pans out with our pilot as we expect, we come back next summer with a much broader geographic sort of range that could cover your area perhaps.
Just the other thing on while I'm there, you know, my husband got the disease in 2017, and luckily there was an age report on the weekend before he decided he should go to the doctor, and he was successfully treated. My grandson got it 2 years later, you know, just from picture, but he's in a Brunswick residence. You know, he unfortunately lives in Brunswick too, but I presume these new Brunswick isolates are very recent isolates. They're not back in the past. Is that correct?
I could speak to that. I could give our...
No, I don't want to, you know, interrupt the meeting, but I was, you know, wondering about just the whole...
I think it's worth commenting on that. Tim, go ahead.
I can, and I will, but I'll give my colleagues at the Department of Health an opportunity if they want to. In particular, Dr. Elaine Tay may wish to comment there. Otherwise, I could say something about the Brunswick cluster.
I think go ahead, Tim.
Okay, so the Brunswick cluster actually is a small number of cases over about a period of 5 years. So it, you know, it could well include your grandson's case. I don't know the particulars, but that's certainly a possibility. So it is relatively recent, the Brunswick cluster, but it's, you know, it's a slow. It's very hard with new clusters to decide whether a disease was acquired, you know, in Essendon, for instance, or was it when someone visited their holiday house in Rye. So it's been the identification of a possum in the Essendon area with Buruli ulcer that's allowed us to understand that there's a low level of transmission going on in that, you know, in a north area.
Yeah, it was just the genomic. I just, you know, there was some reference to the genomic analysis, and I was just wondering if, you know, if there was any interest in you know, further genomic studies for people infected in Brunswick or...
Oh, there is definitely interest. Yeah, there is definitely interest in that. It's an active area of research, but it's a good question, and yeah, certainly one we're following up.
Bruce, would you like to add anything further to what Tim's saying?
Sure, Rebecca. Hi, Bev. My name's Bruce Bolam. I'm the Executive Director for Communicable Disease at the Department of Health. And obviously, we've been delighted to be working as partners on this piece of groundbreaking research because we know Buruli ulcer is an issue for our community and has been growing over a number of years, and there's a lot we don't know. In the department, we get notified by doctors and by the labs when people get tested, and obviously we then use that to try and drive our response. And as Professor Sneers said, there's a lot we don't know, which is why we're so heavily invested in this piece of research. Because of the research that has been done and by some testing that's happened in that area, we thought there's enough evidence for us to earlier this week put out a Chief Health Officer alert. So Professor Sutton, who's our Chief Health Officer, we agreed with him to send out an alert on that in order particularly to raise awareness of the issue for primary care practitioners in the area who otherwise wouldn't necessarily diagnose if somebody presented. Obviously, there's a lot we don't know, and it's really in large part because of this ongoing research that we've now got the capability to understand what is happening. And it is the first time that we've seen a cluster of this type in an area away from the coast, which obviously prompted our alert and obviously raising awareness in the community. As Tim said, it's going to be certainly an area of ongoing interest for us, but also we know that because it's it takes such a long time between somebody being infected, showing the case, being identified, and also just the low risk of transmission. These, kind of clusters of cases can take quite a long time to appear and get on the radar. So now we know about it, we clearly want to get that prevention message out there, and particularly that message of beating the bite, which I don't think necessarily for people who live in that area wouldn't necessarily resonate unless they had a beach house down in the areas where we know that it's more of an issue.
Thanks so much for that, Bruce. I am now going to thank you for raising your virtual hand, John. That is also a possibility. You can either raise your virtual hand or your physical hand, and hopefully I will see you. But John, your question, please.
Okay, just a clarification, like that other person who got a house in Rye, but a holiday house, is there online a list of the addresses so we can see if in fact we are in the right areas? That's one question. The other question is, you mentioned putting something in your septic tank that can reduce your mosquito amounts. I just wonder if someone could tell us what that is. And the third question I've got is, if we are outside the study area, is there a way that we can, as an individual, source a gravity trap with the intention of just minimising the number of mosquitoes around the house?
I'll ask Dr. Peter Mee to answer those questions. Thanks, John.
Hey, yeah, so I guess, just if you want to email through to that Beating Buruli email address, I can, or one of us can respond to you if your house is actually in the one of our zones, and I guess we can go from there and setting up traps and everything. So you can get some of the gravity traps from commercial suppliers. So the Australian entomological suppliers sell a larger type of gravity trap compared to the one that we are using. So, but they're actually really quite simple. So you could potentially make one yourself. So really you just need a bit of a bucket, at least a mesh, a very fine mesh that will prevent mosquitoes getting to that water source, and a sticky coating. I guess just one key thing that you really have to keep on top of is making sure that that water, is not in contact with the mosquitoes, or if it is, that it is refreshed at least once a week so you don't turn into a breeding site. And to your third question, which was the septic tank larval treatment. So the product is called No-Moz. So it is, the active compound is S-methoprene. And so it's a larvicide that has been used around the world. It's World Health recognized that you can drop it into your water sources or into like buckets or ponds that have gone rancid, and that actually stops the larval stage of the mosquito emerging to an adult mosquito. So it just breaks the cycle there. But again, like, it degrades after a relatively short period of time. So it's a thing that you actively have to do.
Sorry, if I could just ask a supplementary question to that.
Sure.
Excuse my ignorance, but are septic tanks a source of breeding mosquitoes normally?
So not so much. So if they're like nicely maintained and healthy, they're usually pretty good and you won't get mosquitoes breeding it. It's just those ones that have maybe gone to the wayside or broken down and been a little bit abandoned, that they're probably the ones that we really want to look out for.
I think that they really can be hotspots for breeding. I mean, I've seen a few myself, and it's not obvious where the mosquitoes can get access. The adults can fly in and out, but I've lifted lids where they've been teeming with wrigglers, so it's certainly possible. And you could use no-moz where you would flush it down your toilet, and it would end up in your septic tank, and it would be active there for a few months.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, John. Any further questions? Now, just to our guests who are joining us and not wanting to be recorded with their video off, if you do raise your virtual hand, you don't need to come onto the screen to ask your question. You can just ask it by voice, and I won't say your name. So if there are any further questions, please raise your hand. Yes. Jackie, would you please go ahead?
Could you put that email address up again, please?
Yes, I'll do that right now. Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't quick enough before.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
Unfortunately, I don't think that the chat function is currently working. Otherwise, I would have put it in the chat function, but it's not there. So I do apologise for that.
Okay. Okay.
Do we have any further questions for the study team?
I've just got one question, but it's not directly related to this. But so I wouldn't want to waste the meeting's time if there's something else. But
that's okay.
It's just relating to the other study that was set up in the Beating Buruli at the start, the case-controlled study. I regularly look to see if there's any publications that have been outcomes to date of the Beating Buruli, and I haven't seen anything, and I was just wondering how that case-controlled study was going.
Now, Tim or Catherine, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I can answer it. It's not a very satisfactory answer. A lot of the research that had been planned last year got waylaid by COVID. So they finished and were very successful in terms of recruiting people and collecting the data, and did a lot of site visits, as you might be aware. And I'm not involved in the lab analysis of it, but I understand that they've done a lot of testing and found some interesting things. But that you're right, there haven't been any publications. And we're hoping to get them out, sort of the analysis done and get them out this year. But last year was a bit of a write-off for many of us, unfortunately.
Yeah, understand. Yeah.
Kim, I don't know if you've got anything further.
No, but it's good, Bev, you're keeping us honest. And
it's so interesting. If it wasn't so personal, it'd be very interesting scientifically. I find it very interesting, but personal interest that because my grandson was quite severely, even though we knew that it could be Buruli at day one. Yes. And got onto it very quickly, but he did have significant morbidity, really. So, I'm very interested from both levels, scientific and.
There will be a number of publications to follow from the first phase, and one will be the case control, showing identifying risk factors for getting Buruli, or protective factors for not getting Buruli. Yeah, and then we also have possum surveillance information that will
that'd be great.
And then there's something I haven't mentioned this evening, but the mosquito surveillance. A lot of mosquito surveillance has already been done.
Yeah, we had traps at our house a couple of years ago.
Yeah, well, some of the key scientists that did that work are on this call. Yeah. And I can just give you the headline summary from that research was that tens of thousands of mosquitoes were trapped. One particular species, Aedes nodoscriptus, was positive for Mycobacterium ulcerans at a frequency of about 1%. And I think, there might have been say 3,000 or 4,000 of that particular species caught. And so we have really sort of solid evidence now that there's a particular species of mosquito, and it's this pot breeding mosquito, this mosquito that's well adapted to breeding in and around our homes, that is carrying the bacteria. So that's work that will be tidied up and will be made public this year.
Thanks.
Actually, I should say on the Beating Buruli website hosted by the Department of Health, there's a text summary of everything I just said then.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Thank you for your question again, Bev. Now I'm going to hand over to Damien. He has another question. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask, probably focus this to either Catherine or Tim, but just in relation to the presentations that come into some of the emergency hospitals in Victoria, is it possible that we don't diagnose it, it gets missed and subsequently gets treated by other means, and so will be picked up in some other broad spectrum antibiotics? And the other question was, if the incubation period is 4 to 5 months, is it possible to maybe take some prophylactic antibiotics in that period with some good results? Are you able to comment on that, either Catherine or Tim?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I think that I think presentations to emergency departments are probably uncommon, but a lot of people present to their GP, and I think as has been mentioned by Bev and others, GPs in areas with a lot of Buruli are right onto it and can recognise it and do the swab and make the diagnosis quickly. But sometimes if you're in another area, people might never have come across a case of Buruli ulcers, so it can certainly be delayed. And in fact, we say 4 to 5 months, but it can be really anywhere from 2 months to 9 months that the symptoms develop, and it can be several months before the diagnosis is made. Now, in the last couple of years, the Department of Health have had a couple of sort of health promotion campaigns relating to this. One is the Beat the Bite campaign, which is sort of all about prevention and trying not to get exposed to mosquitoes and therefore trying to prevent the disease. And the other is about directed at both the community, but also at GPs to try and recognise it early and get that diagnostic swab. It's very easy to do the test, but you just have to think of it and do it. I know from personal experience that sometimes when it's missed, people end up, for instance, sometimes plastic surgeons are the ones who make the diagnosis. Sometimes before they do surgery, they think this looks like Buruli ulcer and take a swab. Sometimes they do the surgery and send the specimen off to see what it is, and then you find out it's Buruli ulcer. Now, that's not always a bad thing, because sometimes surgery does help the healing process. But obviously, the earlier we can pick it up, the more likely it is that a short course of antibiotics. When I say short, I mean 4 weeks, and it has to be dual antibiotics. So they're not the regular antibiotics we use for other things. And so it's unlikely that we would cure Buruli without actually making the diagnosis and giving the correct antibiotics. So something like flucloxacillin that we often give for a skin infection might make it a bit better for a short period, because it might, mop up some other secondary infections, but it won't cure it. If you pick it up early, you might get away with 4 weeks of this dual targeted antibiotic therapy. If it's much later, you might need 8 weeks or sometimes 12 weeks of antibiotics and potentially surgery. So what you said about recognising it and diagnosing it is really key.
Thanks, Catherine.
I think, did you ask a question about the prophylaxis too, Damien?
Oh, prophylaxis, yeah. We don't recommend prophylaxis for it. And I'm not aware that that's ever been trialled. And part of the reason is, even though, say, Mornington Peninsula and Rye have been real hotspots for Buruli ulcer, the reality is we can't predict who's going to get it and when, and we're better off trying to limit antibiotic use and sort of keep it for when people really need it, rather than a just-in-case kind of scenario, I think.
Thanks.
Bruce Bolam from the Department of Health. Catherine mentioned the Beat the Bite campaign, so I thought I might hand over to you to provide a little bit more information about that.
Sure. So Beat the Bite is a campaign, obviously, to raise awareness of the importance of avoiding mosquito bites and reiterating those key kind of health promotion messages that we know, that it's about making sure that you try and avoid as far as possible mosquito-prone areas, particularly at dawn and dusk when we know that mosquitoes are most active, that if you're outside and you've got exposed areas of skin, that a DEET in the mosquito repellent will be beneficial, and to try and keep your body broadly unexposed through loose fitting clothing and potentially light colors as well, which are less attractive to mosquitoes, as general prevention messages. Obviously, also on top of that, as has been really well explained tonight, I think, is that other piece, which is beneficial for your household and also for the general community, of trying to reduce potential reservoirs where mosquitoes can breed. And I know that for myself here, and you can tell I'm a Pommy, it took me about 2 years to figure out that my next door neighbour had a sink over her backyard where I live in Bayside, Melbourne, which was a beautiful mosquito breeding ground, which put us off our summer nights down in our way. And it wasn't until I went over there, spotted it, we shifted the sink, and hey presto, no problem anymore, kind of putting those two and two together. So it is reiterating some of those key messages, but I think for people who go camping regularly from Melbourne, who live in those coastal areas, it can kind of seem like common sense. But for many of the community, new migrants like myself and others, it just is important to keep reiterating those messages, particularly during the time that we know that mosquitoes are at their most active. Obviously, during the season, they do vary a lot according to temperature, water, and so on and so forth. So we have put out those pushes when we've had particularly bad years as well, in response to floods and over the summer period more broadly. So anything we can do to promote that message, and we really encourage Bev, Damien, and everybody else, you know, the more of an echo chamber we can create, getting that Beat the Bite message out, certainly is something we're very keen to be pushing. Tomorrow you'll see a little bit of media going out as well, focusing on related mosquito-borne issues, and again, promoting that Beat the Bite message.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Now, do we have any further questions from our audience? Just a reminder that if you are off camera and want to remain anonymous, but you still have a question to ask, to raise your virtual hand, and I won't say your name, and you can ask your question if you would like to. There is an opportunity to do so. But if we don't have any further questions, we'll see if our study team have any further final comments to make about what's coming up. Any final comments, team?
No, just thank you all for joining. It's been nice to see some faces and try and answer your questions, and encourage you to use that email address to keep in contact if you've got any ongoing questions.
Yeah, my comment's exactly the same. Mark Upton from Mornington Peninsula Shire. Thank you all for joining. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks everyone for attending. Oh, Tim, did I cut you off there?
No, I just agreed. I mean, actually, I don't really want to have the last word, but here I go. Just the support we've had in response to a bit of media over the last few days has been terrific, and there's a lot of goodwill, a lot of people trying to help us control mosquitoes and be part of the trial. So we're extremely grateful and appreciative of that. Really, just echoing what Mark and Catherine just said.
Can I just make a quick comment? And one of the reasons for getting on this is that my partner likes hiking, and she wears a particular brand of sporting wear, which is very popular in Kew and Hawthorn. And she has been bitten and has a fairly large lump. So I know that the purpose of this is not to diagnose a condition, but my wife is in health, so she's aware that it is mosquitoes and a combination of March flies and anything else that likes attacking people from the UK. But I just wondered about, there was a comment there about clothing, but I will tell her that dark clothing is obviously an issue, I gather. That was what was flagged. Is there anything else in relation to clothing? Because I think some of the material is thicker than others, and the mosquito, I don't know how long their snouts are, but obviously just some guidance on the preferred material to to wear? Is it possible to recommend anything, or is that a bit too detailed?
Hear me.
I would just, I guess reiterate what Bruce was commenting. Just really, if light coloured clothing are better, and loose fitting if possible. So I guess so that you don't have that close contact with your skin, because the mouthpiece of the mosquito can actually go through quite thick clothing at times. So really to have kind of that loose clothing is probably best.
Great. Well, you'll probably see a reduction in sales of 2X shoe in Melbourne, I'm sure.
Bruce, I think you had your hand up to add some further comment.
I was just going to reiterate those points that Peter just covered.
Excellent. I'm just wondering if you wanted to repeat the advice of the CHO advisory about going to your GP and asking for a BU test. Is that correct? Oh, you've just muted yourself again.
Apologies. Sayings of 2021 as opposed to 2020. You're on mute, Bruce. So absolutely. The purpose of the advisory was to communicate to the public, and particularly the primary care practitioners, to GPs and others, that if the critical issues of looks like a mozzie bite but sticks around too long, doesn't seem to heal effectively, going and getting that checked out, getting it inspected. It is the primary care practitioner, it is the GP who will be best placed to make a call to determine, is that something that should be swabbed, and get the test. And reiterate Tim's point, it is relatively easy to diagnose, and it is entirely free through our public laboratory service that Tim and all of the colleagues from the Melbourne Diagnostic Unit are involved in. Sometimes private providers do charge, but certainly there is a free public provision there that means everyone in Victoria can get themselves tested. And obviously, if they visited one of those areas where we know there have been historical cases, or in this new instance of up around Moonee Ponds area, Essendon, Brunswick, it's worth definitely going to see a GP, have a conversation, get it checked out, because as has been very clearly iterated a number of times tonight, early intervention is key. The sooner there's a diagnosis there, the better the likely outcome for patients.
Thanks very much, Bruce. My 3-year-old son has just joined us asking me to do something. So is there any further questions? And if not, we will close. But I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for joining us this evening. A reminder that if this recording will be on the Mornington Peninsula website, hopefully by tomorrow. So please feel free to mention it to your friends and family in the area. If you want more information on the project, you can go to www.2.health.vic.gov.au/beating Buruli. And if you would like to get, Hamish, be quiet, please. And if you would like to get in touch with the project team, a reminder that email address is beating-buruli@unimelb.edu.au. And I do apologise about the end to this meeting. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. Bye.
Bye-bye.